And welcome back, folks, to Truth versus News. This is for July 29th here. What a week we're talking about, what a week we're going to have with the Democratic candidates coming on. And so, again, truth is, is politicized, all is lost. We're in a heck of a state here because you can't believe anything the media says. And even discussing recent events. Go ahead, Jim, what we got for next story.
Thank you, Don, very much. We're turning to foreign affairs. Trump's acknowledged he could destroy Afghanistan, but he won't. He could kill millions. The war could be won in a week. He's talking about the nuclear annihilation of Afghanistan. It's absolutely stunning. Trump is arguing the U.S. is making progress in Afghanistan despite all indications that the war is continuing to worsen. He provided no metrics, nor indeed really could he have, since the Pentagon has dismissed all such metrics over the course of the war and no longer keeps track of much of anything that was once lauded as potential signs of progress. That's disturbing in and of itself, of course, since we need to know what's going on in the ground, and when they're not allowing any way to measure it, that means they're covering things up. Meanwhile, I republished on my blog a retrospective on the costs of U.S. nuclear weapons. Does it matter in military, political, or economic terms how much the United States has spent and continues to spend to develop and sustain its nuclear arsenal? It turns out to be in excess of $5.5 trillion on our nuclear weapons program in the interval from 1940 to 1996. In this republication on my blog at jamesfetzer.org, I've embedded Dr. Strangelove, how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb, which I believe everyone in the world ought to watch at least once every single year, while Trump is declaring he's okay with a war against Iran, which is troubling in and of itself. While his position tends to change with little notice, he said, it could go either way, and I'm okay either way it goes, which is a bad thing to be saying. He followed it up by announcing new sanctions against China, saying they're intended to punish them for accepting crude oil, meaning from Iran. This is likely to be a bigger problem for U.S.-China ties than Iran itself, since Iran is already heavily sanctioned. If Trump's new bellicose stance sticks, this could be a major shift in U.S. hostility toward Iran. Trump's been one of the few top officials insisting he doesn't want a war. But if he's okay either way, that's very troubling. On the other hand, let me guess, you want to nuke them all. Trump has constantly been baiting John Bolton in front of officials. Trump likes to goad his national security advisor, John Bolton, about his lust for military action, as Iran claims to have captured spies working for the U.S. and accusing Bolton of trying to start the war of the century. New details have emerged of the president's fondness for baiting his advisors in the company of top officials. During a White House Situation Room meeting last year, for example, Mr. Trump reportedly said to his hawkish national security chief, okay, John, let me guess, you want to nuke them all. According to the report by Axios, Trump turned to Mr. Bolton during a meeting in the Oval Office with the Irish Prime Minister and said, John, is Ireland one of those countries you want to invade? Quoting unnamed senior administration officials, the account claimed the president recently joked John has never seen a war he doesn't like. If it was up to him, he'd take on the whole world at one time, okay? He said on Meet the Press. Yet the president is said to get touchy if critics of Bolton complain the national security advisor could pull the U.S. into an unnecessary conflict against Trump's will. He doesn't want anyone to think he's anyone's pawn. Sources said Trump likes to keep Bolton on his team because his aggressive reputation gives the president the opportunity to play good cop to his advisor's bad cop. He thinks Bolton's bellicosity and eagerness to kill people is a bargaining chip when he's sitting down with foreign leaders. Bolton can be the bad cop, Trump can be the good. Trump believes this to his core. On Sunday, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif tweeted about the White House hawk at Tehran's dispute with both the UK and Britain threatens to escalate over the seizure of a British oil tanker. Make no mistake. Having failed to lure Donald Trump into a war of the century and fearing the collapse of his Team B, John Bolton is turning his venom against the UK in the hope of digging it into a quagmire. Meanwhile, an Iranian cargo ship is sunk in the Caspian Sea. This is very, very troubling. I believe this has to be a Mossad operation to try to exacerbate tensions. An Iranian cargo ship sank in the Caspian Sea near Azerbaijan's Lankaran port on Friday, according to Iran's state-run news agency. The Azerbaijan State Maritime Administration said it received a distress signal from an Iranian cargo ship near the port after it had been involved in an accident. The crew of the ship was pleading for help. The ship carrying a shipment of tiles was en route from Penzali port in Iran to Makhusa, Chankalanka in Russia when it crashed in an area about 23 miles from Astara port in Azerbaijan. After the crash, the ship sank as water began to fill. 2 Azerbaijan choppers and the country's Coast Guard were involved in the rescue, resulting in the safe rescue of all 9 crew members, 7 Iranians and 2 Indians. Iran, meanwhile, has successfully tested a medium-range missile because Iran is not going to abandon its right to self-defense. According to U.S. officials familiar with the situation, Iran successfully tested a Shabab-3 missile on Wednesday, traveling from the country's south toward an area near the capital of Tehran, about 600 miles. Analysts say they believe the test of the medium-range ballistic missile by Iran is intended to improve its accuracy. At the same time, some Western officials are seeing the test as a provocation. That's because the test happened roughly in line with Britain announcing new naval operations in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. This is a reaction to Iran seizing a British tanker last week, itself a reaction to Britain seizing an Iranian tanker on July 4th. There's no reason to think the Iranian test on Iranian territory is a big deal, but U.S. and British tensions against Iran mean it almost inevitable to be blown out of proportion and for the U.S. likely to take the matter to the UN. Scott.
Well, this once again fits the scenario, the mode of the British for triggering conflict, international suspicion, and international tension and such, as they've done for quite a while, in luring and dragging the United States into war. We saw that in World War II, really. We also saw that in the Gulf War of 1991 under George Bush Sr., and we've seen this under of course, a coordinated operation with CIA, Mossad, and MI6 in the Twin Tower 9/11 attacks. And now we see the British again luring the president into a Gulf of Tonkin false flag, most likely operation, which will be erupting in the Gulf of Hormuz. So we know the Iranians don't want conflict. We know they do not want any sort of global hegemony agenda. Neither do the Russians. The Chinese really are the kind of the parasitic termites that are looking to attach themselves like blood leeches on the natural resources of the world. But this operation in taking tankers and creating tension and conflict in the Gulf is going to lead to some sort of an event where President Trump is going to be called again, like, in a sense Bush was, to say, you need to stand with the British and the Israelis and the Saudis. We're all going to attack Iran. Are you with us or not? And a lot of people are going to surround Trump and say, yes, we're in it because democracy's in it and the Statue of Liberty's in it. And we need to be the fighters over there so they don't come here and invade Detroit. I'd love to see them come and invade Detroit or some of these other places like Harlem or Texas or California. Of course, they won't. So President Trump needs to really recognize that there is, of course, a deep state military-industrial complex Zionist agenda to trigger a conflict that will be his undoing. Part of this will be the impeachment of Trump. If he goes into this trap, it'll be like a bear trap snagging on his leg. He could be impeached for that, and it would result in the American public voting against him and voting for a Democrat who would most likely be, even worse. So I don't think Trump will fall for this, though. I think his entire instinct in his gut is in harmony and in accord with the American people and with their instincts. And everybody who's been advising him, like Tucker Carlson and you and I and Jim and others, have been saying consistently, the pathway to the presidency for 2020 is along the pathway to peace. It is not along the pathway of war. Americans have no stomach for it. Again, their watering in the throat is up to here. And if you pull one thing that backfires, America is going to vomit you out. So Trump needs to recognize he needs a little bicarbonate soda of replacing all the bad guys in this administration, replacing the strategic communications. Here's the thing. All war is information and psychological warfare first. It is a psychological cultivation of the domestic population in order to prepare them for conflict, like we saw in the Pearl Harbor preparations of 9/11, with the movie Pearl Harbor being released prior to the attacks of 9/11, with the cultivation of weaponized theories of planes crashing into buildings before 9/11. And all of this was instantly triggered in the realization of these theories and then quickly covered up. And the smoke and rubber tires of patriotism and God Bless America and the national anthem played at the National Cathedral and the tear-jerking emotionalism of founding fathers cheerleading is suddenly suffocating the air with a carbon monoxide of delusion and distraction. We experienced that in 9/11, but we're not going to suffer it now. And I think this Gulf of Hormuz, the Iranian situation, the Russians, let's not forget, the Russians have intimated and will follow through with a, quote, joint defensive pact operation agreement. The Russians are not going to allow Iran to be hit, invaded, or suffer, I don't think, some sort of an attack, because that will weaken Russia geopolitically, and they're just not going to tolerate that. They went into Syria to stop all of this forest fires, and they're probably going to continue that. So I don't think Trump is going to start a war. I think the best thing he can do is appoint Rand Paul to go over and build the bridge, and of course Senator Dick Black, and perhaps Tulsi Gabbard, as the Democrats throw her over the ship. Perhaps Trump is smart enough to float a little dinghy next to that ship and catch her and put her into his capacity in some way. Go ahead, Jim.
I think those are great comments. Yeah, Don, go ahead.
Real quickly on that Iranian ship that sank, what kind of boat hit that to make it so dramatic? Did they say what boat hit it? How did it get?
They didn't say any boat hit it. They just said it sank. And then it
was right.
Plane, Don. That's why I'm saying it's an obvious Israeli Mossad op.
Right. That's right.
Not about
that's right. Leaving out the details. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that it's seriously in doubt, in my opinion.
Right.
Meanwhile, we have an electromagnetic attack sparking massive blackouts across Venezuela. This is a more dirty dealing by the United States. This is completely disgusting. Widespread power blackouts were first reported Monday evening across 15 Venezuelan states and Caracas. Venezuelan Information Minister George Rodriguez said an electromagnetic attack caused the nationwide blackout. It terrifies me. Back in March, the country experienced the most damaging rolling blackout in decades that brought the country, already devastated by economic crisis, closer to outright collapse. It terrifies me to think we're facing a national blackout again, said Maria Luisa Rivero, a 45-year-old business owner from the city of Valencia in the central state of Carabobo. The first thing I did was run to freeze my food so that it does not go bad like it did the last time in March. It costs a lot to buy food just to lose it, she said. Widespread blackout. You can see all the states that have been affected there on the map. Meanwhile, NetBlocks, a civil society group observing internet traffic around the world, sent several alerts via Twitter starting around 4:45 p.m. Eastern Time about a widespread power loss across Venezuela, disrupting the country's internet. The group said even state television, a key source of government propaganda, was brought offline. The latest disruption comes a little more than 4 months after widespread blackouts crippled the country for about a week in March. Most of Venezuela's 23 states have no internet connectivity. You see them listed here. In the previous blackout, we documented how cryptocurrency transaction volumes plummeted throughout the region. Some residents were prepared for the chaos and set up local transaction networks. but others were at a loss. Widespread power outages, no internet connectivity have occurred just before Juan Guaido, the self-proclaimed interim president, is expected to launch a nationwide anti-Maduro protest. So we know the key to it there, where the whole idea of labeling Maduro the presumptive president is just as absurd as if Russia, China, and Iran were to declare Nancy Pelosi the president of the United States. Just absurd. Scott.
Well, this is one of the ugly deformities of the Trump foreign policy, which the chief of deformity, John Bolton, with his scarred lip and his cleft palate camouflage, and his subsequent hatred for himself, which translates into the hatred of humanity. We've profiled that. And John Bolton is one of the most sick and deranged and violent men. And it's very sad that Trump has ever even allowed him on his team, for God's sake. He is single-handedly the most, the corrupt leper with all of the stench and ugliness of the greatest lie that American people have been infected with, which was the Iraq War. And Elliot Abrams and all these other Zionist people that are on his team. Let's not forget Sigal Mandelwecker, who is the Secretary of Treasury in charge of the Office of Foreign Assets Control, who has been the leader on setting sanctions against the New Horizon Conference and the Iranians that allowed all of us to go over and begin building bridges of diplomacy. The Zionist dual Israeli U.S. citizen Sigal Mandelwecker of the Department of Treasury has instituted these sanctions to pursue a Zionist Israeli policy. This is odious. This is sickening. This is unconstitutional. This is treason to the president to have these people there, but it all falls on him. He has to fire them. He has to investigate them. They should be charged as agents of a foreign power because they're doing these sort of things. This attempted overthrow of Venezuela, look, nobody likes socialism. Nobody likes the inherent godlessness and communism. Look at Ocasio-Cortez and these other idiots who are looking to steal everybody's money and spread it around. That's failed since the French Revolution. It's failed under communism. It will always fail because it rewards the idiots and the slothful and the stupid and the rebellious in society by taking away the blood and the energy and the resources of the most dynamic, creative, attractive people in society. And that's the war of eternal human inequality. Yes, inequality exists for a purpose. Everybody is according to their own talents. As Friedrich Hayek said in his Austrian economic analysis, The Road to Serfdom and other things, man needs to be allowed to be liberated at his economic, imaginative might, so that everyone is floated. You don't make a rich man or a poor man rich by making a rich man poor. So Venezuela is an example of a failed foreign policy of attempting to coup. It's going to fail because there's no momentum behind the people to overthrow Maduro. And what we see under the puppet is a lot of incompetency and ineffectiveness. Sadly, it comes back to haunt Trump. And the other thing is the Venezuelan embassy, I didn't like seeing the rainbow flag of lesbian, gay, transgenderism being flown on the U.S. embassy flag. You don't do that anywhere. The U.S. embassy flag is not to have any flag other than the red, white, and blue, not the rainbow, faggotosis, LGBT agenda. That is the most sickening thing that has happened to the Republican Party, and it will be the demise and death of America, if not society. Jim?
Well, just as Donald Trump is a democratically elected president of the United States, Maduro is a democratically elected president of Venezuela. He was just reelected by a margin of 60-20. Guaido wasn't even a candidate for the presidency. The situation is absurd. Venezuela is entitled to its own self-determination. The United States has a very bad record with nationalist leaders who want to use the natural resources of their country to benefit their own people. It happened before in Chile with Allende. It happened in Cuba with Castro. It happened in Vietnam with Ho Chi Minh. We have to recognize each country has the right to determine its own future. And our constant intervention and destruction of those countries to benefit the profit margins of U.S. corporations and the multinationals is despicable and must come to an end. John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman lays it out. Any American who doesn't understand this has to read his book, and read it now.
Yeah. Well, we really had a pattern of practice of a history here since at least the 1900s of exploiting other countries and destroying them, and we don't care about them just so we get their resources.
Yes.
And that's caused the wars. I mean, Second World War, Vietnam, and it's all laid things for 9/11 and everything else. It's just
that's right. And here we have the U.S. even planning new sanctions against Russia for supporting Maduro. Very, very embarrassing. Trump has continued to put punitive measures against Venezuela since January, when Washington, along with 50 other countries, recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the crisis-ridden country's interim leader, which was a manifest absurdity. Russia, North Korea, and Cuba support Maduro, and I stand with them. The pressure will continue. We'll have more sanctions tomorrow, said Elliot Abrams, who is himself a disgrace. That he should be in this position is revolting in the extreme. Meanwhile, in the UK, Boris Johnson shows his true colors. As Boris Johnson has just moved to number 10 Downing Street, he's enacted a sweeping cabinet purge. 17 of the ministers appointed by Theresa May have been asked to stand down or been sacked. He's replacing them with loyalists and like-minded Brexiters. I believe Brexit is the right thing and the British people want it, so I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. Meanwhile, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javad, and Dominic Raab will take over the Foreign Secretary. One appointment resonates rather more ominously. Disgraced former International Development Secretary Priti Patel has now been appointed as Prime Minister Boris Johnson's new Home Secretary. While we don't argue with Patel's position on migration and asylum, we have misgivings on other issues. Has been sacked as the International Development Secretary in 2017 after it turned out she had been holding secret meetings with Israeli officials and government ministers. We do not know what was discussed, but some would see holding secret meetings with representatives of the foreign government as tantamount to treason. Yet Boris Johnson has just appointed such a person to a key post. Even though holding secret talks should have been enough to exclude her, particularly one as important as Home Secretary. While it's true that as Home Secretary, she won't have direct control over UK foreign policy, her remit will include policing and national security. This will enable her to oversee the passage of new legislation on issues like terrorism and, of course, anti-Semitism. While Patel's past dealings should have prevented her posting, Boris Johnson himself makes no effort to hide where his sympathies lie. Indeed, he's on record as saying he's a passionate Zionist who loves Israel. So his appointment as another Brexiter and low-key Zionist enabler should come as no big surprise. Scott.
Well, it's a sad thing when you see politicians selling their souls for bags full of cash and money, which is exactly what these, quote, passionate Zionists and lovers of Israel are doing. It's not about respect for human rights or understanding that the state of Israel now and the Palestinian people and the Jewish people that live there, that all that needs to be ironed out, but it has to be ironed out on an equal basis, on a level footing. It can't be done with obscene prejudice, like 100% pro-Israel, 100% pro-Saudi, and 100% against Iran. That's not a balanced way of approaching the world or understanding issues. It has to be, I'm 100% the truth, 100% devoted to balance and harmony, and not on any one side. So, when Boris Johnson and these people are doing this sort of action, it's very, very odious. The only redeeming quality that is going to come, I think the British people as a whole are very, very supportive of Brexit because they do not want to be subjugated under a German, French, socialist, EU economic system that limits the amount of economic output regarding chocolate or fisheries or any domestic manufacturing or sales, which the EU has done. The EU, and I have relatives in Britain and Europe, the only good quality of the EU, which was originally the purpose of its foundation, was to eliminate the inter-travel borders so you didn't require passports at every border, the Schengen agreement. So everyone was in favor of an EU compromise, so you didn't have to go through extensive travel purposes or visa requirements when traveling from Britain to Denmark or France or Germany or Italy or these places. But the sad reality is, with that freedom of travel has come the slow strangulation of economic sovereignty and free market capitalism and exchange and relationships. It's all been subjugated under a bureaucratic class of tyrannical idiots and bureaucrats, and that's the origin of the discontent with the EU, which flowered into the vote for Brexit. And I think that's going to be manifested, or else you could really see an uprising and civil war in Britain, because they're tired of this sort of oppression, which the EU, especially under Germany and Merkel, have been pushing. Jim?
I think those are very astute comments, Scott. I agree with that critique.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Meanwhile, our sisters, House Democrats, rally to the side of the anti-American squad, obviously from a partisan point of view, but it's a significant development. Let there be no doubt about it. The Democratic Party is now whatever Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and his squad say it is, because of all the anti-American, anti-Semitic, racist statements they've made since taking office in January. It was only when President Trump told them to go back to their countries of origin and fix them before criticizing this one that Nancy Pelosi and her caucus got their dander up. Ilhan Omar can downplay the significance of 9/11 all she wants. No Democrat makes a peep. AOC can compare migrant detention facilities to Nazi concentration camps. That's fine. Rashida Tlaib can make extraordinary slurs against our ally Israel, and Democrats are silenced. But oh boy, tell these commies are called here to hit the road, and it's time for an official House resolution. Our sisters, Pelosi called the squad. Now, Trump correctly noted on Tuesday, they are forever wedded to the Democratic Party. And I believe Trump has very cleverly made the squad the face of the Democratic Party. And while that may go down well with a third of the country that declares itself to be Democrats, and not well with a third of the country that calls itself Republican, the middle third, I think, is going to be dismayed and gravitate toward Trump. I have no doubt about it. New polls show Trump approval rating hitting record high. According to a new poll released Monday, that would have been last Monday, Trump's approval rating has reached a record high. A new NPR NewsHour Marist poll showed Trump's rating at 44%, highest level which has been recorded among mainstream polls, except for a July 7th. They gave him a 47%. Those who participated in the poll were surveyed from July 15th to 17th. Interesting, because the data was gathered after Trump's tweets about the four Democratic fresh women of color. So it doesn't appear to be affecting him adversely. It looks even like he's making new inroads with independents. The poll, which includes responses from 1,336 adults, also found Trump has won over a small but significant group of independents. His approval rating among independents increased from 35% last month to 42% in the latest poll. That's a significant jump among independents, among the most important groups when it comes to swinging elections toward either party. I mean, it is the crucial segment. Meanwhile, another poll says Trump's 2020 chances are looking better and better. A major new poll found that Trump has the highest approval numbers of his presidency, and his chances for re-election are virtually identical to those of Barack Obama at the same time in his presidency. The Marist poll, conducted July 15 to 17 among 1,300 Americans, 33% Democrats, 27 Republican, found Trump's approval rating had risen to 44, the highest number. Previous was 43 in February of 2019. 90% of Republicans approve of Trump, 42% of independents agree, but only 7% of Democrats. 38% of national adults say they definitely vote for Trump in 2020, with a whopping 89% of Republicans agreeing. 33% of independents agree. John Kushar of National Journal noted that those numbers approximate Obama's at virtually the same point. Very promising for Trump. Scott.
Well, Jim, we remember that all all political elections are determined by independents. So all political elections are going to be determined by independents, usually about 2 weeks before the election. And that is how they feel. People vote on how they feel in the independent category. They do not have economic ideology or political ideology. They have feelings. And the feelings that will horrify and cause fear is the feelings of an endless war and an eruption of a new conflict. So Trump has to steer towards the path of peace and make himself the world peacemaker. He needs to strategically communicate that brand and say, look what I've done in North Korea. We're now friends. We're going to have beach resorts. We're in the process of making negotiated deals for peace between South Korea and North Korea. That's going to happen. We're not going to invade them. I'm going to set up an embassy. I'm ending the Korean War. So I'm declaring through executive order, the Korean War is over. And that would be a tremendous positive victory. Similarly, he needs to apply that to Iran using Rand Paul, Phil Giraldi, Mike Maloof, and others to begin to develop a back channel communication, remove some of the sanctions against groups like New Horizons so you can enable conversations and alternative diplomats, not official, but alternative, that are steering towards commonality and building a relationship. So Trump can do that with Iran. And of course, with Russia, Putin has always been presenting that he likes Trump. Putin said at the conference in Helsinki, yes, I liked him and I wanted him to win. So Putin said I wanted him to win because he was going to normalize relations with Russia. Every Russian that I've ever known or trained with or I had in the military or I've done conversations in the media, they are decent, core Christian conservative people. And this ferocity of bigotry and anger and arrogance that the Democrats and the leftists feel towards Russia is because they are no longer communists. They are no longer lobotomized by the left. They've grown their brain back. And the Democrats hate that because they're hitting themselves with the hammer constantly thinking they're doing God's work. No, let them continue to destroy themselves. But Russia is a different being altogether. So Trump's emergence in the positive light of American politics is going to rest on his diplomatic foreign policy because that presents the greatest danger of getting us falling into a war. At the same time, it pacifies a lot of the violence and conflict and things that we've seen for 20 years. So North Korea is going to be a victory. Russia is already a victory. And Iran will be a victory. And he doesn't need to make friends of everybody. He just has to say, let's live in peace so that in the next 4 years, we can really move forward. But I need to be elected to do it. The Democrats will throw everything aside and they'll sell the soul of America to China. That's the Democrat agenda. And finally, the four Skigsian witches and the domestic insanity of the Democrat Party have alienated them from the American people. That poll where you're saying is rising to 40%. Again, Jim, we come back to that feeling of watering in the throat before the vomit. That's the poll of Americans coming very higher and higher in pro-Trump because of the fake news. Let's remember Trump this weekend. Gutfeld on Fox News had a good snippet where you see Trump looking right in the faces of these reporters and pointing his finger saying, you are fake news. That's why the American people don't like you. That's why they don't listen to you. That's why you don't have any credibility whatsoever. He's punching them in the face, and they are taking it like the little witches and wimps they are. And that's why Americans love him. They love to see him on the stage because he talks from the heart. And he needs to begin to say, the American people put me here to fix the swamp and the problems and the bureaucracy and the endless wars, and I'm doing that. And I've had to fight, kick, and drag myself free from this tar pit of the Russian hoax, which finally we've put to death. Finally, I'm free from it. But you know what? We need to light a match and burn that tar pit. We need to watch it go up like that effigy Burning Man. That's what we need to do to the deep state is the light a torch, throw it into that tar pit, and watch it explode. The American people want that kind of bloody politics fight. They want, and Trump's the best one to do it. So when he rises, I think his political agenda needs to be domestically building the border, stopping the border, sending the National Guard if he needs be, deputizing groups, militias, whoever it is, executing a Second Amendment order, and stopping all of the border influxes, reversing the refugee law There are no more refugees because there are no more Pol Pots. There are no more Lenins or Stalins or people killing millions of people. These are not refugees. These are economic migrants. These are people trying to get in here to take jobs from Americans and suck out the life of the welfare state. And they will not acclimate. They will not become part of American society. They will exist in little hovels and ghettos. That's what we see in the whole Central American mindset, is they come in the ghetto mentality. Americans don't want that. They want people to come in and be part of the society and culture like they've done since the founding of the society. So Trump is going to win on all these levels, and I think he'll be elected in 2020 because of it, Jim.
Migrants camping in America for a lot of free stuff and voting Democratic.
Yep, that's the way it is here.
Really stunning, Scott.
Very good, very good.
Here we have a very interesting development. I happen to like Omar Ilan a lot, but she's got herself in sticky wicket. Judicial Watch has filed a complaint with the Office of Congressional Ethics that Congress must investigate her for perjury, immigration fraud, marriage fraud, state and federal tax fraud, federal student loan fraud. Very disturbing. Omar appears to have married her husband, presumed brother, Ahmed Elmer, and that substantial, compelling, and to date unrefuted evidence supports those allegations. It's very, very troubling because I wish her well. Meanwhile, Democrat Senator Cory Booker, I think, making a parody of himself, says he wants to punch Trump because he has so much testosterone. Trump claimed his desire to assault the president is because of his testosterone. My testosterone sometimes makes me want to feel like punching him, which would be bad for this elderly, out-of-shape man that he is. If I did that, this physically weak cesspool, Booker said. His promotion and glorification of political violence drew laughs from the crowd. Booker did a heel turn, however, and claimed Trump is the body shamer, not himself, who just called him out of shape, and that Democrats shouldn't stoop to his level. You don't beat a bully like him, fighting him on his tactics, on his terms, using his turf. He's the body shamer. He's the guy who tries to drag people into the gutter. We need not talk about necessarily what we're against, but what we are for. Booker also compared Trump is worse than a racist and compared him to Democrat segregationist George Wallace while appearing on CNN's State of the Nation on Sunday. Meanwhile, the House has voted to condemn the Boycott Israel movement over protests from Representative Omar and Talib, where I agree with them 100%. The bill passed the House Tuesday 398-17, with 5 members voting present to abstain from the vote. 16 Democrats opposed the bill, including Omar and Talib. Just 1 Republican voted against the measure. Representative Thomas Massey, I stand with Massey, Omar, and Talib. They are right, and the mass majority are wrong. New York City has adopted anti-BDS legislation back in 2016 after Governor Andrew Cuomo signed an executive order. While the House bill is just a formal rebuke of the BDS movement, Cuomo's executive order goes further and requires New York State agencies to divest from groups that participate in the BDS movement, even though it's a function of your freedom under the First Amendment. This is absolutely obnoxious. Representative Brad Schneider is the initial sponsor of the resolution. As of 1 hour before the vote, 349 members had signed on. Representative Elliot Engel, who chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee, appeared confident the measure would pass, which of course it did, but it's a shameful event. I stand before you, the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, Talib on the House floor before the vote. Parents who are experienced being stripped of their human rights, a right to freedom of travel, equal treatment. I can't stand by and watch this attack on our freedom of speech, and the right to boycott the racist policies of the government in the state of Israel. I love our country's freedom of speech, Madam Speaker. Dissent is how we nurture democracy. Omar agrees, and of course I agree with them both. It's going to be the case that these laws that are being passed to disallow taking a stand against Israel by boycotting them are all unconstitutional, but the mischief occurs between the time the states pass these unconstitutional laws and the time the Supreme Court rules on them. Meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard is suing Google for the censorship of ads. This is the right thing to do. Presidential candidate and military veteran Tulsi Gabbard is suing Google after the tech giant blocked her ad account shortly after the first Democratic presidential debate, when Gabbard became the most searched for candidate in the Democratic field. Her complaint accuses Google of censoring her at the very moment when millions of Americans wanted to learn more about her. It also accuses Google of sending Gabbard's campaign emails to people's Gmail spam folders at a disproportionately high rate. Gabbard's legal complaint includes the following. At the height of Gabbard's popularity among internet searchers in the immediate hour after the debate ended and in the thick of the critical post-debate period, when television viewers, radio listeners, newspaper readers, and millions of other Americans are discussing and searching for presidential candidates, Google suspended Tulsi's Google Ads account without warning, clearly purely political. For hours, as millions of Americans searched Google for information about Tulsi, and as she was trying through Google to speak with him, her Google Ads account was arbitrarily and forcibly taken offline. Throughout this period, the campaign worked frantically to gather more information about the suspension to get through to someone at Google who could get the account back online and to understand and remedy the restraint that had been placed on her speech at precisely the moment when everyone wanted to hear from her. The Gabbard campaign's legal complaint cites Breitbart News reporting to highlight Google's interference in the democratic process. The complaint cites a Google tape, an hour-long recording of Google executives' reaction to the 2016 general election obtained by this reporter and published by Breitbart last September, and Google employees campaigned to ban Breitbart from Google Ads, an effort that was revealed by Breitbart itself last year. Scott, this is outrageous.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard is leading the charge, or she's part of the attack upon Google and the revelation of their political bias, and that her lawsuit will bring in the evidence and the discovery. And I think everyone who's been criticized or been shut down or abused by Google need to be part of that. Laura Loomer has, I think, also filed an action against Facebook or Google or YouTube. I mean, they're all part of the same corrupt leftist fascism, which has been pushing this asinine political ideology of stupefaction of the country, and it's always the fruit of these selfish, silly engineers, algorithmic, high-tech personalities, which are totally deformed in their human social relationships, and they exist in a world of fantasy. So it shouldn't surprise us that they manifest this kind of extremism, whereas if you're not a half-witted imbecile of the left, you're not worthy of having political ideas or speech shared. That's what we're seeing. I think Google and YouTube and Facebook are going to lose 50% of their value in the next few years when all of these lawsuits, including ours, become fully realized. They are going to lose 50% of their value. In fact, I'll make it a project to make sure that they do. The other thing with Omar and the Boycott Israel movement with Rashida Tlaib and all that, I agree with them too, Jim. I agree with the entire principle of you have a right to boycott and divest yourself and have nothing to do with evil and corruption and abuse. And so I support BDS movement against nations which are doing harm to the United States or harm to humanity and destabilizing the world, which Israel has been doing. With its illegal settlements, with the confiscation of the Golan Heights, and the terrible war crimes and genocide against the Palestinian people, they're the source of a lot of the conflict. They could live in harmony, they could establish peace, but they exist in this genocidal attitude towards the other nations. So the sad thing is, Rashida Tlaib and Omar, they throw the baby out with the bathwater when they stick their foot in their mouth and call white men the real enemy of America or the real class that should be investigated. Now you're really doing something really stupid, and you're throwing out what I could agree with you on, BDS and boycotting these nations who do this sort of thing. So I think it's very sad because they have a lot of good that they could offer, and if they had more tolerance and a more rational respect for the conservative Republican white male sort of attitude towards a lot of this stuff, instead of making us out to be the enemy, they would find America would I think overwhelmingly support them. but because they're so shrill and arrogant and fanatical and fascist, and they use such profane language to attack Trump, they're attacking everybody that voted for him, which means, you know what? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That means Trump is my friend because you're attacking me and you're attacking Trump. So they're destroying themselves with their own tongues. Jim?
Yeah, no, I will say that it looks like Trump is really beholden to Israel. They're so tight there that Israel has got the influence on the mainstream and the main government here. Everybody thinks Israel is holier than everything when they're
Don, let me say one thing about that. Sure. What the Duran and others have commented on is because Trump has given so much political capital to Israel with the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem, with the giving of them in the Golan Heights, with making a coin with his name on it. He's now put them aside to be able to work with and make deals with Iran or Russia or others. So Israel is conveniently relocated to the corner where you usually put retards, imbeciles, and dunces. And now he's given a free opportunity to directly engage with Iran and Russia without the interference of Israel. So in one sense, Trump's political giving to Netanyahu and Israel has been able to push them out of making any claims against him in the future. But at the same time, I agree with you. He's far too lopsided in their support. Jim?
Very interesting, Scott. Meanwhile, we have massive nosebleeds at a 5G concert in UK. This is very, very serious. The British are spreading the word about the 5G rollout, how dangerous the radiation was at Glastonbury Festival 5G demonstration beginning in July. There are massive reports of nosebleeds, migraines, insomnia with people at the festival. A lot of lampposts are already being ready to install 5G antennas all over Britain. The man in the video breaks huge news. Reports of many people working in the food areas having nosebleeds, people having to skip shifts because they were so sick, people experiencing headaches at the concert who never get them. People who went to this concert said it was unlike anything they'd experienced before. Patriots must unite against 5G. I believe it is a killing mechanism. I urge all patriots to join and start organizing, telling carriers and phone companies they will lose you as a customer if they deploy 5G or start selling 5G phones. We must boycott and rage against Trump and others pushing 5G on us. Not that I'm aware of Trump doing that. Demand rat testing for 5 years where the rat is right next to the antenna. He won't live a week. Activate patriots, tell everyone this is very serious. Meanwhile, YouTube terminates the account of a Sacramento family fighting Verizon 5G, small cell tower installed next to the children's bedroom. Few people in Sacramento have signed up for 5G. Many want it gone, including the Davidson family that had a small cell tower installed next to their home. They've been very public about experiencing symptoms of microwave sickness and electromagnetic sensitivity from exposure. According to the family's GoFundMe page, YouTube has now canceled their account. The telecom industry has admitted they have no scientific evidence that 5G wireless is biologically safe, and plenty of research says it isn't. American Academy of Pediatrics and other health experts have also warned children are more vulnerable than adults to all sources of cell phone and wireless radiation. Pets are affected by exposure too. Unfortunately, 5G is still being promoted, installed, and unleashed in the US and around the world, despite widespread growing opposition. Last month, activists measured and videotaped 5G levels at Glastonbury Festival. It's no wonder the Sacramento family is suffering. Very serious, Scott. I'm profoundly troubled by this development.
Yeah, if I can jump in here, and if you can unshare so I can share screens here. Can we do that so I can share screens?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to share screens here. Yeah, that's going to be this one here. Right now, this might seem unrelated. South Korea declares a state of emergency as unprecedented wildfires forced thousands to flee. It's really quite something. I don't know that I need to show that so much, but see, I'm going to go down here. And essentially, anyway, here's a fire. It's pretty heavy. But essentially, South Korea has declared, I got to take this out of here. Let me get this.
Block on your screen for reasons unknown.
Yeah, I know. I got a block on it. I can't get it out of here.
This fire was caused by 5G, Don? Is that the point?
Yeah, and the story here was such that, come on, I can't get going here. I got to get this out of here. I'll move this out of here. Okay, there we go.
5G is purported to be the cause. There you go.
That's it. So here we go. Now, so if I can get this going again, it's something else. Let's shoot South Korea. I can't get it going, but essentially, it turns out that a transformer on a power pole exploded in a rural area and caused 300 and 1,300 acres of fires.
But is that related to 5G or not?
And related, yeah, it is, because essentially this all happened on April 4th. That's 2.5 months ago. This all happened. No word anywhere in the media about it, because the day before, April 4th, South Korea lost 5G networks in that area.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
April 4th.
Good done.
Okay.
Good done.
So there we go. That's it. That's it.
Stop sharing.
Yep.
Scott.
Well, 5G, of course, is increasingly being shown as having human biological disintegration capacity. It's a health hazard. It is a threat to life. And we went to town hall meetings and said and argued that it is a constitutional violation, because human beings, citizens of the United States, have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life means you have a right to live without poison, without destruction, and radioactive destruction of your cells. And any 5G technology is a violation of your constitutional rights. Thus, you have a right to go into court and say, this 5G technology cell tower needs to be stopped. There needs to be an injunction ceasing its deployment because it is violating my constitutional right to life. That's how you get it into the federal court. That's how you get it into a legal stoppage. And the other thing is, they rest on this theory that, based on a 1990s ruling that says you can build cell towers, anywhere, that suddenly you can attach 5G technology to those cell towers. I'm sorry, you're wrong, Mr. Lawyer. The 5G technology does not apply to the 1990s law. That law was made for the old-fashioned phones, the size, of the pop-up or bricks the size of your shoe. It does not apply to this new 5G technology, which is increasingly being disclosed as very, very harmful to human flesh. So this needs to be a court action of the Supreme Court immediately to cease it. Jim?
I agree, Scott. It's alarming in every possible way that this technology that's clearly harmful to human beings and other living things should be allowed to proliferate without having been subjected to appropriate systematic testing to determine its effects on human beings. Meanwhile, Jocelyn Cook has published a piece about YouTube's plan to rein in conspiracy theories is failing. I think she may like the idea of reining them in, but she's reporting that it's not working. I republished this on my blog. Editor's note: what could be more embarrassing to Americans than for YouTube, Google, Facebook, and other social media giants to tell us what we can and cannot watch, what we can and cannot read, as though they had some privileged access to truth, when they are promoting propaganda and disinformation on a massive scale and doing their best to deny us the right and the ability to sort things out for ourselves. And here I embedded my interview about how to spot a false flag, where I go through a dozen or 15 cases and give you the key signs that tells how you know what's going on. If you want to know why they are taking such drastic measures, it's because the internet has allowed 1,000 voices the opportunity to publish and share their own research about complex and controversial subjects, where the organs of the state, including especially the mainstream media, can no longer dictate the difference between the true and the false. We don't need to be told the truth, just the opportunity to search for it. Here is the article. 6 months ago, under tremendous public pressure, YouTube announced it would tweak its algorithm to recommend fewer videos, quote, that could misinform users in harmful ways. How in the hell would they know what information is informing or misinforming? Outrageous. It was a major step for a company that spent years driving people toward increasingly sensationalistic content, including dangerous disinformation. Which is the dangerous disinformation? The Russia hoax, I would agree. But the mainstream media has been proliferating. This is outrageous. Meanwhile, Ralph Sinkay has published a very nice review of Craig Roberts' A Medusa File 2, The Politics of Terror in the Oklahoma City Bombing, also on my blog at jamesfetzer.org. Medusa was a female monster from Greek mythology, and in his first Medusa book, Craig Roberts revealed crimes and cover-up of the U.S. government starting in 1940. I haven't read it yet, but I'm glad he started at 1940 because there were plenty of U.S. crimes committed during World War II, such as the nuclear bombing of 2 civilian population centers in Japan after Japan had already agreed in principle to surrender. I've read one other book on the Oklahoma City bombing, The Secret Life of Bill Clinton by Ambrose Evans Pritchard, about a third of which is devoted to Oklahoma City. And that book, like this one, points the blame ultimately to then President Bill Clinton. All the records for the Mena, Arkansas drug trafficking had been moved to the Mura building in Oklahoma City. And we have reports that those who arrived on the scene were taking out the files rather than rendering aid and assistance to the dead and the injured. Outrageous. Meanwhile, and this appears to be a response to my pointing out that NASA had offered a $13,000 reward for those who assisted in solving a space poop problem, because the current adult diapers they had available were only good for a day when these trips took 7 or 8 days, showing that the entire Apollo program was nothing but a gigantic pile of space poop. They're trying to salvage the situation by claiming the moon is covered with human poop. The moon's been a junkyard for all sorts of objects since the Soviet Union crash-landed a spacecraft on its surface in 1959. But it's not just moon buggies the astronauts left behind. They also left a lot of poo, too. Don't worry, there's a solid scientific reasoning for turning our beloved moon into a toilet. For all their symbolic achievements in advancing humanity, the Apollo astronauts had also been tasked with bringing back lots of moon rocks. But the weight of all those rocks had to be balanced by leaving some unwanted items behind. That included 12 cameras, 12 pair of boots, a telescope, and 2 golf balls. I've explained before that Werner von Braun led an expedition to the Antarctic to collect moon rocks that had been dislodged from moon surface by the impact of small asteroids and captured in Earth's gravitational field, so they could be presented as bona fide moon rocks, but not ones that had arrived by the Mona transportational ledge. Also, I've observed, you see here, a boot print in moon dust, but since the moon has no atmosphere and no moisture, I suspect you could no more leave an imprint in moon dust than you could in the sands of the Sahara. It also includes 96 bags of human waste allegedly filled with urine, feces, and vomit. In an article in the BBC Science Focus magazine, an astrophysics professor, Dr. Alistair Gunn, said the poo will have no permanent effect on the lunar environment, that microorganisms could not have grown under the harsh conditions. Some might have survived a time, but it's almost certain they're now turned into bags of dust. Have we reached the point, Don, we're at the end of our hour? So
we are at the end right now, but that's okay. Let's carry on if you have a few more things. I can edit it.
Let me say this real quick, Jim. Sure. If we had technology and telescopes that could look into the far distant galaxies, we certainly could apply those telescopes to do focused picture examinations of all of the things on the moon. And we haven't done it because we don't have people up there. We don't have stuff up there, Jim.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. And just to show how Russia has more freedom of speech than the United States, I've given interviews about the moon landing, and they've been broadcast over Russian state television, but not here in the USA. Witness this. It's in Russian, of course. Well, you notice several Americans are interviewed, including yours truly.
Анализируя фото и видеоматериалы, сторонники лунного заговора указывают на отсутствие звезд, развивающийся будто бы от ветра флаг, что было бы невозможно в крайне разреженной атмосфере Луны, ровную поверхность вместо кратеров, которые должны были образоваться при посадке модулей и так далее.
Все доказательства того, что посадка на Луне была фальсифицирована, заключаются в одной фотографии. Обычно при солнечном свете тени ложатся параллельно по отношению друг к другу и никогда не пересекаются. Вот эта фотография, по уверениям правительства, была сделана на Луне. Тень астронавта и тень от камня, которые находятся от него в паре метров, перпендикулярны друг другу. Это доказывает, что эта фотография...
Proof of multiple sources of light on the moon when there ought to have been only one.
А главное, они убеждены, уровень технологического развития НАСА в тот момент был недостаточен для того, чтобы отправить
This is about a
человека на
Soviet
Луну.
physicist's
Например,
calculation
ракета-носитель
that
не
the
обладала
Saturn V
необходимой
rocket didn't have
мощностью, или
sufficient
невозможно
thrust to
было
escape
безопасно
low
пролететь
Earth
через
orbit.
радиационные пояса.
Обратите внимание на то, насколько четкой была коммуникация между Землей и космонавтами. Не было задержек, будто они находились где-то рядом. Но что еще важнее, в то время для приема и отправки сигнала требовался передатчик размером с автобус, которого никто на фотографиях с Луны не видел.
Таким образом, уверяют сторонники теории заговора, американское правительство, стремясь обогнать СССР в космической гонке, привлекло режиссера Стэнли Кубрика, который к тому моменту закончил работу над своей космической «Одиссеей», чтобы достоверно инсценировать в телевизионной студии полет на Луну. Аргументы заговорщиков не раз опровергались и объяснялись. Более того, СССР признал и поздравил США с успехом миссии.
Корабли Советского Союза, оснащенные гигантскими антеннами, ловили сигналы, которые отправляли астронавты во время полета на Луну. Как можно было это сфабриковать? Над проектом «Аполлон» трудилось 400 тысяч человек. 100 тысяч из них работали здесь, в Южной Калифорнии, ходили на работу каждый день, создавая оборудование, которое должно было отправиться на Луну. И ни один из них не заявил, что все это было фальсификацией.
Несмотря на то, что сегодня существуют неоспоримые доказательства того, что человек побывал на Луне, миллионы американцев до сих пор верят в то, что это был один большой заговор. Исследователи говорят о том, что сама идея человека на Луне настолько невероятна, что психологически гораздо проще поверить в то, что это была инсценировка. Евгения Дюло, «Настоящее время», Америка, из Лос-Анджелеса.
Very nice lady who interviewed me. Meanwhile, there's another video out that's absolutely devastating. This is a physicist who calculated what it would have required had we actually landed on the moon to have taken off from the surface of the moon. It would have required massive propulsion system, and we had nothing that could accommodate it, meaning if we actually had been on the moon, they'd still be there. This is it. The moon landing, how does it bring him back? Check it out online. This is a completely brilliant video. Meanwhile, to return to where we began, Moonrock Books has published 12 volumes of conspiracy research on a wide range of subjects, but now, because of Amazon's new policies, they have banned 5 more of our books, The Parkland Puzzle, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either, Political Theater in Charlottesville, from Orlando to Dallas, and nobody died in Boston either. It's a shame. It's a disgrace. There's more freedom of speech and freedom of the press in Russia than there is in the United States of America today. Scott.
That's right.
Amen, Jim. That's exactly right. There is more truth and freedom in Russia, and I would say Iran too. I've noticed that when we're on Press TV or RT or Sputnik or 360 and we're telling the truth alongside other Americans, we're welcome. We're not told what to say or how to say it, and they're having you on to disclose the moon hoax is a fantastic demonstration that truth is being eclipsed in America, and America is being turned over to the darkness that has been growing in the heart of this country for 50 years. And I could see a complete renaissance, or I could see a dark age in America, and I could see the new beacon of truth being emerged outside of the United States. And it saddens me, but remember, God is in charge of the destinies of man and countries and nations. So let us continue to stand for truth and fearlessly proclaim it and knock anybody that tries to eclipse it out of the way with a passionate dedication. Jim?
Yeah.
Take us out.
Oh, okay. Well, this is a little bit extra overtime on Truth versus News for the July 29th. And by the way, it's all happening, folks, and you can find it here, nowhere else. Share this widely, because this is the truth. All the other stuff in the media, that the media is distorting the truth and politicizing it, you can't trust that. But I think that we're about the best source you can find, and I really appreciate the support and the kudos that we're all getting. So thank you, and adios.